I think, as Demi was saying, like she was referencing a bank, most people will be like, we're on different planets.
Like content designers will be surprised to see, I think, if like a content designer came across this podcast, they'd be really surprised to see that we're doing it with a copywriter.
Welcome back to Roadmap, Auto Trader UK's product and tech podcast. Today's episode is a bit of a battle of the minds, we should say battle of the words. So we got two schools of thinking in the domain space, the domain space. It's not like hip hop, of copy and content design. That's important, not content design. And who better to have a right ding dong? We've been having a bit of a laugh so far on the couch. We've got Demi. Hey, Demi.
Hello.
So, Demi, you're a senior content designer.
I am.
And we've got Rach. Welcome back, Rach.
Hello.
So, again, you're also a senior content designer. Mm-hmm. And last but not least, we've got Richard, who is a senior creative copywriter. One word. One word.
3 words, but yeah.
Well, yeah, I meant copywriter. So, I know we were joking before about a bit of a live battle, and is this the good versus evil and the appearance of the devil? But it is really interesting to sort of like work out with yourselves, because you're all, in the grand scheme of things, recent hires to AT in the last 3 or 4 years, and just understanding like the synergies and the differences between the two roles and how you work in that sort of like what we call the healthy tension to make the magic happen. So really to crack on, it'd be really interesting just to start to unpack what you think as a three are the synergies and the differences between copywriting and content design. So I will leave it up to you. Who wants to start?
Ooh, yeah. We all write words. That's our biggest commonality, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We write them in very different ways, though.
They are two disciplines that are often confused quite a bit. You will see like our role as content designers is sometimes advertised as UX copywriters, for example. So
Yeah.
And that's just how it is. But copywriting and content design is actually two very different things. So I guess, yeah, as Demi said, we all write, of course we do, but it's two very different schools of thinking and two very different skill sets, because one is, for us as content designers anyway, we're all about clarity and user experience and getting someone from one place to another and making sure it's accessible and making sure it's clear. Whereas copywriting is, Richard, much more.
Well, yeah, I was waiting to go third just in case they were going to be nasty about me. I wanted to get the sort of picture of it right. But so yeah, different, and it's just been interesting how we join them up. The way, when I was sort of mulling over this, one of the interesting things I think is that I believe content designers are much better human beings than copywriters.
This is what he wanted to name the podcast.
Yeah,
we objected.
Yeah, I did hear that was one of the debates even before we got on. Like, what do you call this?
Yeah.
What do we call it?
Yeah, that's not easy because, content designers want to be very clear and very helpful. I want to stop people who are interested. So that's quite a different place. So it's almost like, and not to be shaken off from my point of content designers are better people, the reason that might be true is that if you're a copywriter, your job is to influence and persuade people that possibly have absolutely no interest in what you've got to sell or promote. So to do that, if you were to analyze a lot of copywriting, it literally leans into the 7 deadly sins. So sloth, it's like, this is easier. Do this, it'll just save you time.
Yeah.
Greed, you can't have too much chocolate, can you? So I think something that inherently leads into the 7 deadly sins. I mean, I'm not saying copywriters don't seem like good people, obviously. We seem pretty nice, but just be aware that we're there to persuade and influence by any sort of dark arts we can. Whereas my understanding of content design is there to help you frictionlessly get to where you've already decided you want to go. So the difference in tone is huge. Like, Demi and Rach will talk to someone like they're in the room. I've got to stop them and bring them in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going back a point, you said, like, I think Ray said people sometimes get it mixed up. So have you been in previous lives been like asked to write copy and it's just like, this goes against my grain, or is that your where you started before you got into content? So I'm just interested because it is, I think when we first met, I think me and Demi were on a project together, and I assumed that content design was exactly the same as copywriting. And so then the stuff you were talking about, I'm like, I don't understand why we're talking. Like, obviously didn't go, I don't understand why we're talking about it, because I just internalized it. But it was a bit like, I'm not sure why we're focusing on this particular thing, whereas it was like that, what is the call to action? So like, what is so going back step is, have you ever worked in copywriting, you two, or has it always been more on the content design, the good side of the line?
Yeah, I used to work in copywriting. So I worked as a teacher before content design. And then as part of that, I had a lot of spare time. I was living in Korea. So I started picking up freelance work online.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. Started picking up freelance work online, and that was copywriting.
Right.
And then it kind of started to evolve into content design. So I was writing product copy for an app, but I didn't know that kind of UX writing or content design even existed until I moved to the UK. And I was interested in product design and talked about my background. And somebody was like, oh, so you were a content designer. And I was like, what's that? And that's kind of how I learned more about content design.
And so, Rach, you shook your head. You have been with
I've
the
never
dark art
worked,
of copy.
No, I've never worked in like traditional copywriting. I used to want to quite a bit before I really knew. I'm kind of glad I never ended up there because it's actually not my skill set at all. I can't do it. I can't think conceptually. Like I'm not. My brain doesn't work that way. But I used to work. So I have a degree in graphic design, but then I left that behind because reasons. But I. Then I kind of fell into SEO, or like search engine optimization, and content marketing and content writing, and that is all about like that's more typically like long form. We have a content kind of writing team here. They do all of our like blog posts and like, editorial stuff and articles and stuff, and that's where a good 8 years of my career was spent. So it was all about getting backlinks or improving SEO rankings, Google rankings and stuff. And it was long pieces of content, like long blog posts, or did a bit of PR as well. And it kind of, I got to a point where I was like, this is great, but I kind of want to write something that has more of a purpose than just metrics and SEO rankings and things like that. It kind of wasn't fulfilling what I wanted to do, and I ended up writing a couple of bits with another colleague for a new website. For example, there was a website being rebranded, and it was more about writing like what would that button say, or what would that journey be like if they landed on that page? Would that make sense based on what they've just seen? And I was like, oh, I wish this was a job, because actually I really love this. And then I found out it was a job. I was like, oh, brilliant. So that's when I started to steer my career back towards that, and ended up in conversion rate optimization, which was more about data and UX and that sort of thing, and then combine the two to be a content designer. But even here, I have been asked to do copywriting, kind of. I was asked to write a script. This was before Richard joined the company. I was asked to write a video script, and I was like, I don't know. I did it. I had a good go because we had no one else that could even come, give it a go. So I did, but I was like, this is way outside my comfort zone.
Yeah.
Like, it's another skill entirely.
Yeah, it's interesting, because it is the bit where now you have to start to explain it a bit more. It's like, because it is all words, but it's used in such different ways.
Very different purposes, yeah.
So, Richard, have you always been in this sort of world? Because it's funny when you started talking about the good versus the evil and stuff. Is it, have you always been on the dark side of copy and stopping people in the street?
I think so. And I think in defence of the dark side, I'm comfortable that we live in like a capitalist market economy, and I think actually it served us brilliantly well. I went on holiday to Cuba at Christmas, and there's nothing in the supermarket. So I think generally the fact that part of a capitalist market economy is we sell stuff. So Yeah, I would say my copywriting career probably started on Loughborough Market when I was 14. So I learnt to shout. If I shouted, "Come on now, ladies, you bananas," they would stop and they would smile, and there was a chance they might come on and buy some bananas. Now, two of those are still rules of copywriting. Get people's attentions, and if they're smiling, they're buying. So I suppose you could argue it goes back to being 14 and working on the market, but equally, yeah, I ran agencies where I was the lead writer, working for brands in a completely different sector, so sort of outdoor clothing, lifestyle clothing. Like we were Barber's advertising agency for 5 years, Berghouse's for 12 years. So I ran agencies and was the writer, so I would do the sort of strategy and the writing, which for me are sort of really linked. I don't think I could write without thinking, how would a brand appeal to somebody, because I couldn't even pick up a pencil until I'd worked that out. So for me, strategy and writing are very linked, and I've always done the writing part. I did for a while. I did work for the Manchester Evening News as a car correspondent. It was so long ago, and I did it for such a short period that I forgot to mention it at my interview. Because at that time in the Manchester Evening News, you'd be on gardening one day and you'd be the car correspondent the next day. It was just like chaos. So I think I was one day a car correspondent.
But so what was it like then? I mean, this is probably a question to Demi and Rach then. So obviously, did you both join at the same time, or was it Demi first, Rach second, Rach
Me
first,
first,
Demi second?
yeah. I got here about 9 months before Demi, so I was on my own, content designing on my own.
Was that a new thing here?
It wasn't a new thing. We had a content designer before, but there was a big gap between that content designer leaving and me joining.
Yeah.
But the good thing was that everyone was so excited to have a content designer back, because everyone by that point had a taste of it and knew it was important. So it was nice actually coming.
And weren't you on like a 1-to-15 ratio, like you with 15 product designers who all wanted her help?
Yeah,
So.
which was nice feeling. But
That sounds lovely.
Yeah.
So then Demi, you joined, and so what was the lag then between? So obviously, we started working together and we're forming the whole content design, like thinking, and actually, there's more than just yourselves now. So what was the lag between you two, like sort of forming that content design thinking and strategy that Richard then appeared out of nowhere?
My way.
I want to say over a year. Yeah. When did you start?
March
Last year.
Okay.
Yeah, just over a year.
Yeah, a year and a half,
about
probably.
a year and a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was it like when all of a sudden, you're doubling down on content, and I don't know, I quite like the whole Jedi versus the Republic, blah blah blah. Is on the we're working on content, and there's been some asking for copy, and then someone with a deep copy background suddenly appears in your sort of domain space. Was it a shock to the system? Was it welcoming? Thank God.
Yeah.
We were
got
quite
somebody
excited.
else.
We were
weren't we?
excited, yeah.
Couldn't tell.
As if. But somebody like George, one of the design leadership team, came to us and said, what do you think about getting somebody, to do copywriting, senior creative copywriter here? And we were both really excited and really on board, because obviously Rach mentioned that's so far from like where our skill set is, but it's really good to be able to collaborate together on things like landing pages where you do want to pull people in a little bit more, but still make it really clear. So we were excited, and especially to have somebody in-house, because we were also working with agencies, but there's nothing like having Richard here to like know the product, know the company, and be really passionate about it.
So what's the last year then been like in terms of, obviously, again, for the history, we'd formed the content design, Peeps really starting to motor, then new person, Richard joins, and now today it feels like there's harmony, there's tension, but in the right way, and doing some good stuff. So what was the journey from arriving, Richard, to today? Was the things you need to think about, like the way you work, the way you collaborate? Because you're not necessarily always on the same projects at the same time. You may be working completely independently, but then have a crossover at a certain point. So what were the important things to sort of start to share, work on? I don't know.
I think it was really important to us to make like a personal relationship. I think in content design, they're often like in the industry as a whole pitted against marketing. Like it's almost like where is the healthy tension? Can it be healthy? So like on day one, we were like, we want to have like a great relationship with Richard. So we went outside and went on a walk and just got to know each other, talk about our experience and our goals. And that was like trying to start it off on the right foot. And then Richard and I were thrown into a project together. I mean, your second day here, did you join? And that was really good. But it did take time to figure out our ways of working. We were both eager to work with each other. But what does that actually look like in like a healthy and successful way? I don't know how it was from your perspective.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly described. It did take, I had to Google. I thought, why am I talking about copy to designers? Well, because I had to Google content design. Think, why if they're designers? Why are they writing so much?
So, I was going to ask you, because had you not worked with content designers? No,
I hadn't.
So that would have been like if you've worked with copy and in copy before. So it's a different side, isn't it, when you've never worked with these?
But I was grateful because I didn't know. I didn't come in as doing tons of UX writing and stuff. So I was like, all the good practice about UX writing, clarity, and all those things. That hadn't been a huge part of. It hadn't been a huge priority to me. So I couldn't have worked on anything without Demi and Rachel's sort of deep knowledge. So I guess I was always open to all the things I don't know, which is still quite a lot. And so yeah, that I've found, and it was interesting because we meet on pages, and I think my take on that would be if we meet carrying our different flags, and mine says copywriting and theirs says content design, it gets sticky. So sometimes it will get a little bit sticky because of that. But if we put the flags down and just write together, like somehow the idea that one of the titles was kicked around between fluff and function. It's like, if I'm the person that fluffs the copy, which obviously is deeply insulting, but we'll move on from that. If I was the person that did that, and somehow Rach and Demi were the people that did function, it's like ridiculous, because a lot of their copy would be full of delight anyway, and a lot of my copy would be about getting the message across clearly. So I think we work well when we put our flags down and we just all work on it together. And the difference of where people are in their journey decides whether we should be bringing them in or moving them along.
No, I mean, in my head when you said like we meet on the page, so I'm trying to write this board thing at the moment, and there's two of us writing it, and it's a bit weird because you're like, you can see each other writing on the same page. So when you're working, how do you do that? Do you like sit together? Is it more like you've got an online, like how do you work to them when you say?
Have you seen a Ouija board in action?
But when I was about 14. Like you see some content moving around, like, whoa,
who is that?
No, I mean, I'm pinching one of Demi's lines there. So hopefully in healthy tension, we pinch each other's lines and just help ourselves. And and I would say, like one of the things Demi said, well, we can't sit and hold a pencil together, like a Ouija board. So I think we prefer to discuss and go away and think and come again. And sometimes if we're in a rush, we have to write on the same bit at the same time, like the leasing work I'm writing with Rachel. We're sort of both tapping away at the same time and talking at the same time. But I think probably our writers aren't generally blurters. It's like often a bit of a ruminating thing. So we go away and we think about it. So, and then we come back and we discuss it. Long-winded. That's why it's so hard, and everything takes so long.
No, I get you. So is it been like this is the bit I'm really interested in. So is it like a lot of, like you say, come together and it's asynchronous, like going off, working independently and coming back? Is that like the way, just because time bound work, or is because you need to think as well, or do you prefer it when you're actually on it, working on the same thing? Like if you're looking at a particular page from a copy and content perspective, like challenging each other real time. What is like the, if you're going to say that's the best, if you could architect the best way of working, is it the one where think, go back, do independently, come back again, or is it the maelstrom of everyone just on that one page?
I think we always prefer it when we can be all together at the same time.
Yeah.
At least we all like to start there. So when we might have like a bit of what we might call a bit of a kick-off of like, okay, let's sit together and agree on what the like key like propositions are, what the key messages are, and then go from there. But I've really enjoyed it when, for the leasing emails, for example, when we have sat together and we've been typing, almost like pairing really.
Yeah.
And like, well, I'll start typing something and go, no, that sounds a bit nah. And then Rich will be like, actually, why don't we play on this a little bit? Like, okay, I'll type that. And then it's actually quite fun.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do have to go away and come back, but that often ends up then we have such polarizing sometimes ideas. So what I'll go away and do all this, and I'll think, okay, I've done a reasonable job there, and I'll bring it back, and then Richard will be like, I don't know if you've thought about this. I'll be like, yeah. So it's almost like back to the beginning anyway.
Yeah.
So it's better, I think, to be together.
Yeah. And my experience would be, what I love the most is when there are no camps left, because Rachel writes something much snappier as a starter, or Demi will write something more emotional as a mid piece. And I'm like, oh, that's ace. Yeah, I wish I'd have thought of that.
Yeah.
You know, that's when you're just working as writers together and you're not trying to do a specific job. That's when I enjoy it the most.
Mm-hmm.
And do you like, if you're looking at a particular flow or a page, you go like, this is where copy dominates and this is the content, or is it that those lines are much more blurred? Because I was trying to think of an example where we've got like a headline here and there's a call to action there, and then there's sidebar might come in with a load of other information. Do you sort of say that's my domain space, that's mine, or is it more the lines are so much more blurred now?
It's a good question, that.
Yeah, we tried your way, kind of like, this is Richard's area, this is Demi's area, and we found it does not work because it seems like two different people wrote it, which is what you don't want on one page or within one journey. So now it's totally a blend, but I think we've been able to learn from each other, especially in the past year, where I like find myself being like, oh, Richard, like me write something, Richard would like this. Like I know he would find that nice. And it's like what projects we're on as well. So we don't write everything together like with Richard. It really depends on like where it is at a journey level. So for example, like to reserve a car online, you might want Richard's input a lot on the landing page that gives you all the information and tries to get people to explore the journey. So I might have a go at it if it's not one of Richard's top priorities, but then meet with him to kind of do like a little critique session and get some feedback.
Definitely. So do we write in like a consistent like tone of voice? Because I've read that. I don't know if you've ever. I think it's Good Omens. There's a TV, but I read the book and you can tell when it's Neil Gaiman writing, you can tell when Terry Pratchett's writing. But they got a similar style, but because they're doing it from two different personas, it sort of really works well. But like, if I was reading a page, could I go, oh, this is Richard, this is Demi, oh, that's Rach, or have we got it to the point where it's just one tone of voice, so you can't really see who writes it?
That should be the way it is.
So that's what we're aiming for.
That's what I think. I think we're more or less with that. Like, I don't think there's anything massively distinctive now where you're like, oh, you can tell Richard wrote that versus Richard definitely.
It's a bit
didn't write
like, like everyone has a different style. So, when you do employee comments on stuff.
Yeah.
Like, Ali, who's my lead, knows mine because I always put ... I don't know, whatever I write, I put ... So it's like I've got a common, like a start. Yeah. So it's interesting. So did you start with your own signatures and then have to work out?
That'd be really disappointing if, as a professional writer, you were putting your own signature on things when you're paid by a company to develop their signature.
So for each, that's interesting. So if you were doing work, but let me rephrase this question. So have you got like a core one that you go, like, someone's always funny or someone's always really sharp, whatever it might be? Is there underneath it, when you go right back to the base level, there's a core, or can you completely adapt the style depending on what the situation you're in? It's a bit like when I speak, I can probably change my tone. I did then, or talk a little bit better, but generally I've got like a base that I'm building upon. So is it that everyone has a common base, or is there no such thing?
I mean, again, being from the dark side, it would be I need to have maybe across my career 50 very distinct tones and
Right.
50 different signatures, because I work on the signature of the brand.
Yeah.
I would hate to think that anyone thought, oh, Richard wrote that for that brand,
Right, yeah,
because
yeah.
that's like,
I've never thought of it like that. Yeah, that
No,
you totally.
yeah, it goes
you've
with
got multiple. Yeah,
yeah. So, and I think the tone of voice thing is really important, because that's one of the big things we've been wrestling with from the start. Was a sort of kick-off project around that. So the aim is to have the Auto Trader signature, isn't
Yeah.
it? Because we all work for Auto Trader, and we'd like a consistent brand tone that allows people to feel, oh, I'm talking to Auto Trader and they're consistent, so I trust them a little bit
Yeah.
more because of that.
And is there, because we joked about being the dark side and the light side. So is it like, again, is it the same tone and the same person? It's just used in a different way. So do you know what I mean? So again, I was thinking, so in my mind, I thought the copy tone is different than the content tone, but you could there wasn't quite a direct link. Or is it a case it's the same tone, it's just used in a different way? Like what's dialed up and what dialed down?
It depends on the situation, I think. So we'll always agree on whatever that situation is that we're writing for, and whatever the, our kind of the headspace we think that the consumer is in at that point, or whatever it is. The copy, whether it's more copywriting or whether it's content design focused, it's going to sound the same.
Yeah.
It's going to be in the same tone. It's going to have the same energy. It's just that some of the content is going to be more about, okay, let's get you to the next step now, rather than persuading you to do something or to take an interest in something. So it should always be the same tone, like, because it's serving a purpose and in that particular scenario at that point. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Although the way we've sort of framed it to help is also that it's helped us a little bit sometimes call the unifying bit the voice and the flex bit the tone.
Yeah, exactly.
The way we played with that. So it's like the example you gave is, if you're talking to someone you love, your tone is probably quite hopefully different to the way you would talk to a plumber that's late.
Yeah.
So
plumber's my best mate. So.
And you really, really love the plumber. Okay, that's a bad example. So
No, I get what you mean.
Yes, you get what I mean. But your voice, we still recognise that was Pete's voice. So we're building a model and we're working on it, and we're involving every team in it, because we work collaboratively here, and so we're building a project that our voice has commonality and our tone flexes as much as Cross Pete to Schmexy Pete.
Yeah, this is where it gets like it's a bit like super in my head, like a bit too abstract for me to consume. So when you're saying like, so is this where we're looking at particular words, like we use this word for? Like, how does that manifest itself when you're creating a tone?
Not quite sure. I'm following
It
you
would
there.
a bit, but it's not like these are our special words that we use all over. The way we've built this structure between us is to create a framework of voice, which is we're straightforward, because I think sometimes we all saw ourselves. There was almost this polarity that was there was the emotion stick that was used to beat up the content designers, which is like, it's not emotional enough. And I was like, well, we weren't trying to be emotional. We're on the finance or whatever.
Yeah.
So there was a bit like the emotion. So part of, I think, one of the things that we started talking about was we are a straightforward brand. Our experience is pretty straightforward, and that's good. Millions of people come to us for that straightforwardness. So it's all right to be straightforward. Let's be straightforward. We want people to do stuff with us, so we're intentional, and we're warm, because we want a bit of a sense of belonging. And that came down from driving change together responsibly. So those three thingies, as our delivery lead likes to call them, those three thingies, or personality traits, if you want to be highfalutin, they steer the voice. So we're midway in this project. We're just getting up to testing and stuff. But then the tone between a social media engagement, emoji, and micro copy on a finance journey, you're going to dial straightforward up in one place. You're going to dial up warmth in another place. So it's like a
So it's all part the same, but it's just like where we go the emphasis on it.
Yeah.
And it's like, what feeling do we give the people consuming that content?
Yeah.
Like, do they feel like it was straightforward? Do they feel like it was warm? We would never go out and say, here's a straightforward finance application. But how can we like give the words to let the user know, like, you are like going to be able to complete this on your own, and it is going to be straightforward, but we don't want to use those kind of key
Yeah.
like
No, it makes
buzzwords.
sense, yeah.
Which is where the kind of copywriting versus content design as well is like, Richard's job, as you said before, was about persuasion and that kind of thing, whereas the subtle difference with us is you're not persuading someone, but you are giving them the confidence to do something.
Yeah.
So it's like making them feel like they can do something.
Yeah.
and if
It's
their
quite
journey's
similar.
been frictionless,
Yeah.
they generally feel pretty good about you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this sounds like, I mean, obviously, it's one of those ones where I do these and think, I wish I'd done this and just had this conversation just anyway, because now I understand a lot better. So how does that manifest itself when, because obviously it's great because we're all in-house, well, you three are in-house, like when we go external to agencies, do those challenges dial back up again because, you know, they're not living and breathing the tone of voice, or is it a case of like more and more is coming in-house now?
I think more and more for the type of work that we're involved in, especially speaking for Rach and myself, it's more in-house. So we've got Richard. So to be able to stop by his desk and ask him a question rather than go to somebody, explain all the context of the product and all the background. For us, it's more in-house. I do know that we still do use the agencies, but I think the tone of voice project that these two have been working on will help massively with any kind of hurdles that exist, if they exist.
So you might have noticed in the past that if we're doing it, so part of the tone of voice project, obviously consumer marketing is deeply embedded in that project. So, and from the start, they've wanted to be able to steer external agencies in tone, but we hadn't really agreed it as a company from the top to the hands on pencils, you know. So if you haven't agreed tone, it's one of those strange foundational things that what you can't see often isn't that interesting. And if it's foundational, it's easy to ignore until your house looks a bit crumbly. And so we might do an ad that's really spiky, maybe like parrots. So, and everyone goes, well, I can see where you came from there, but don't really feel like us.
Yeah.
And you might do an ad that's really gentle and all warm friend, and you might go, it doesn't really feel like us.
Yeah.
So if you don't nail the foundational stuff, that then gets... So consumer marketing have been deeply embedded in shaping where we've got to. If they weren't, then it absolutely couldn't work.
Yeah. I started thinking of like the bit when you said it doesn't fit. It's like when someone does a bad impression, isn't it? Where you can sort of see it, but at the same time, like, whoa,
What's
and
wrong
it
here?
jars,
Yeah.
just jars.
It's like an ill-fitting jacket.
Yeah. So we're coming up to time, unfortunately. But I just wanted to ask that if I wanted to understand more about this, because I did do a bit of Googling, and some of the articles I came across, they were content rather than content design. So I was reading them going, that doesn't quite sound like what Rach and Demi do. So where would you go to say this is like, or these are brilliant authors that if you read them, you'll really, you could read more about this whole, like what copy means, what content, tone of voice. Is there any articles out there or particular authors or blogs or experts you say, if you want to know more, go up there? Or is it a case of just hook you three up on LinkedIn and someone can chat more about it?
Yeah, I think we're always happy to chat. We have taken a course with Content Design London, which is like a content design agency down in London.
Yeah.
We always rely, they kind of have style guides and things that you can refer back to. The like .gov, is it .gov?
Gov,
yeah,
Gov
we
UK.
go back
Yeah.
on them.
There's plenty of places that we could direct people to that explain thoroughly what content design is. I don't know if there's any, I can't think of any specific articles that would be like, here's what content design is versus copywriting. Maybe we need to write one.
That's our next
I
step.
absolutely think we need to write one.
Yeah, 'cause I couldn't find anything
No.
that when
Yeah.
because you obviously sent some ideas to talk about, which we do, but I was like trying to go like do a bit of research myself, and everything I hit I was like, that sounds a bit, not as interesting as stuff we talked about here. It was all a bit meh. So
Yeah.
maybe that's
Yeah.
something you could definitely do once we get the tone of voice absolutely nailed.
It's relatively new still, isn't it? How you merge them.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
has been like typically content designers would be in-house, copywriters would be in agencies, and not getting each other.
Yeah.
So I think it is relatively new to merge them in a beautiful, seamless way.
Brilliant. Right. Cheers for that. That was
Thanks.
super. Honestly, I could have talked about another 45 minutes. So cheers, Richard, Rach and Debbie for that. Like I said, hopefully people can hook you up on LinkedIn. So thanks again. Thanks to listeners for tuning in, as always, to yet another episode of Roadmap. Remember to like and subscribe on YouTube. Hit the notification button so you never miss an episode. And follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And that is done now. Cheers for that. Layers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.